I'm Henry the Eighth, I am. Henry the Eighth, I am, I am. I got married to the widow next door. She was married 7 times before, and everyone was Henry. I'm sure you probably haven't heard that song, but maybe some of those my age, it was hermits singing about Henry the Eighth, because probably the English had to study history a lot. And Henry the Eighth was quite a figure in history. So let's go on with Henry the Eighth. So what about this Henry the Eighth? So we started with Henry the Seventh, and Henry the Seventh was married to Elizabeth York, and they had their sons, and they raised their children to be royalty and be kings. And one of their sons was named Arthur, and one was named Henry the Eighth. Well, Arthur was a baby. When he was a baby, he was 2 years old. The kings decided with the Spanish king and queen, and you might remember them as Isabella and Ferdinand. They were very famous because they were the ones that sent Christopher Columbus out on his journey and bumped into America. I didn't know it. But anyway, Spain was getting very wealthy at that time, and they had their children, and one of the little girls, her name was Catherine of Aragon, and she was pretty, little princess. She grew up and she had this long hair that went all the way to the floor, and she was princess. But when she was just a baby, and she was 2, and Arthur was 3, they decided that they were going to get married. Well, the kids didn't decide. The parents did. They even had a wedding, and had other people stand in for them as proxies and went through the whole wedding ceremony while the babies were sitting in the back, He's only 2 and 3. They had no choice. Kind of weird, wasn't it? But anyway, they planned that when they grew up, they would be married. And when they turned 15 and 16, they came and brought them together and said, now you guys are married. And so they said, okay. So they did have another ceremony, a ceremony saying that this is our royal king and queen. They're 16 and 15 years old. Arthur seemed like a good-looking young king, and she was pretty beautiful, long red hair, and they'd work pretty well. But then 3 months after they were married, Arthur got the fever, terrible fever, and he ended up dying. So what are they going to do now? They have a queen, but both countries thought, we can't have queens run the country, especially Spain. No, even though Isabella, she pretty much ran the country. But anyway, so England. So we're talking about England. So we have Catherine. Well, guess what? We have another son. We have Henry. And Henry decided he was going to be king. Well, they knew that he was next in line to be king anyway, Henry the Eighth. And so they put him up there. He's young too. He's actually Arthur's younger brother. So he ends up marrying Catherine. They get married, young couple. Well, first they had to get permission to get married because they already had this big ceremony and everything, and the Catholic Church had some law or something that the king, he couldn't marry his brother's wife. But they said, well, they end up saying, oh, we'll let that go. We'll let that go. So they had to get permission, and they got married. They lived for quite a few years together, about 18 years. And they had a few kids, but the kids got this plague and got fevers and stuff, and they were kind of sickly. And so they ended up having one girl, Mary. Later on, we'll call her Bloody Mary. But anyway, one daughter. And after a while, Catherine wasn't able to have children anymore. And not that she was so old, but for some reason she wasn't having children. So, and Henry, he kind of liked this woman that was actually one of Catherine's maids, and he thought, I kind of like her, and he wanted to marry her. Well, he's already married. And he said, well, I want a son. All I got is a daughter. Because daughters can't reign and rule the country. He didn't think that women could do those kind of things. Back then they didn't. So Henry, he asks for annulment or a divorce. Well, annulment means it never happened because, you see, he said it was arranged marriage anyway. Well, of course, the Pope said back then, no, you've been married for almost 20 years. What? Are you out to lunch? I'm not sure exactly that's what he says, something like that. And so Henry's like, I want to follow the Pope. When he was considered this grand Catholic king following the Pope, suddenly he didn't want to follow the Pope anymore. He goes, I think that the kings and queens, that they do not have to be led by a pope in Italy. So he decided that he was going to get this divorce, and the divorce went through, and he married the maid, one of maids of Catherine's, and her name was Anne Boleyn. And he married her. He married Anne, and they did have a child. The child was a girl, beautiful, healthy girl, and named her Elizabeth. And then time went by. He wanted to have a boy, not a girl. Don't give me any girls. I don't want girl babies, even though he dressed her up like a little princess and everything. He wanted a boy. So he got kind of tired of Anne, and we don't know. He accused her of things, which I'm sure she didn't do. Why would she? He was a tyrant, She would probably want to do what he said. Well, he executed her. He beheaded her. Not a good thing. Sounds like he had a mental illness himself. So he beheads this beautiful young lady that was his wife. That starts on. And as he goes on, he ends up deciding to get married again. Before he gets married again in 1534, he puts out this act of supremacy. It's where he said an English monarch is the head of the Church of England. The king is not subject to the Pope or any other authority. The head of the church would be himself. And he abolished the monasteries in England, and he took over the church, and anyone who opposed him would be killed. Quite a deal. Now, some people say he became a Christian. I don't know. No. He didn't become a Christian. He just wanted to use Christianity and what Martin Luther and the Protestants had done to say he was protesting. Although he did end up having them print a Bible, but he took over as the head of the church. He was not any much different. The religion was not much different than the religion of the Catholic Church, because there was no love and following Jesus, So what Henry did next kind of proved that he was not really following God. So he had beheaded Anne, and he married another young lady named Jane Seymour. And she wasn't of the royal blood either, but he thought, well, she's pretty good looking, I guess. And he married her, and she had a son. But the son was sickly. His name was Edward. Married another Edward. But he was sickly from when he was born. And then Jane, she died right after in childbirth. And so the little boy didn't really have his mother. So we have a little boy, Edward. We have a little girl, Elizabeth. Both of them without, mothers. And then we have Mary, who's now in Spain with her mother. And it's kind of a dysfunctional family there. Let's take a little break. Part 2 of Henry VIII.